Halloween, the Madhouse, the conclusion. Chapter 16. Eddie landed painfully at the bottom of the laundry chute, half on the cement floor, half on Christine's leg. She let out a loud whelp. "Ouch! I'm stuck!" she cried, trying to free herself from a tangle of ropes. Eddie extracted the video camera from his vest so he could use the built-in light to see where they were. He could barely move. He shone a beam of light and saw that they had fallen into crude netting made up of thick ropes and cords in the bowels of a dusty, dark basement. Eddie cursed and tried to struggle free. It was no use. They were trapped like helpless flies in a complex spiderweb. "What is this place?" Christine whispered shakily as she tried to wedge her leg out from under Eddie. "Where are we?" The basement looked as if someone had been living there. Several empty wine bottles, candles, and stacks of scattered medical records were strewn across the floor, along with a few worn blankets and pillows that had been heaped together in the corner. The smell of human waste and decay filled the damp, still air in the dusty den. "I don't know," Eddie said nervously, noticing the fear in his own voice. He swallowed hard. "But it looks like we're in the... Oh, man, it looks like we're in somebody's room and we're the guest of honor." "Oh, my God," she sobbed. "This must be Michael Myers' hideout. Oh, Eddie, we've got to get out of here before he finds us here." Eddie forced himself to think. He squinted his eyes shut and tried to return to his normally logical self in the midst of this madness. "Start pulling at each strand of rope," he told her. "If we can get one loose, we might be able to escape." Christine began tugging at the tightly knotted trap. Her hands were becoming raw from the tugging and pulling, which didn't seem to be helping. She put her hands to her face and whispered hysterically, "I can still see him, those dead eyes staring at me, and the smell. I feel like it's all over me." Suddenly, light, dragging footsteps scuffled from somewhere in the basement. Eddie and Christine froze in horror as a flickering candle illuminated the far corner of the room. An evil, taunting laughter cackled sharply against the stone walls from somewhere in the darkness. "What do you want with us?" Eddie blurted out, pointing the camera toward the light. The laughter stopped abruptly, and a hideous figure appeared. Christine and Eddie screamed together at what they saw. The unusually tall, skeleton-like figure floated toward them, draped in a filthy, worn doctor's coat, with a toothless smile upon its ghastly pale face. It extracted a gleaming scalpel from its pocket and clutched it with a set of yellowed claws. The thing's wild white hair and sunken eyes bore into the screaming teens. Christine clutched onto Eddie and stammered, "It's the ghost of the deranged psychiatrist." The reality of what was happening numbed her entire body. Eddie was too shocked to say anything. He couldn't move. He could only stare at the dreadful apparition that was closing in on them. The thing that was surely going to kill them. The ragged, rasping voice began laughing again. Christine, crazed with fear, began screaming in a glass-shattering pitch as the thing swung the blade of the scalpel at them. Eddie squeezed his eyes shut and threw himself over Christine in an attempt to save her from death. Christine's heart pounded in her chest, and she kept thinking it was strange how she didn't feel the scalpel plunging into her flesh by now. The movement of the rope net had stopped, and Eddie lay motionless upon her. She could feel his rapid breathing. Christine forced herself to open one eye. The sunken-faced thing had receded across the room and was staring back at her through slitted eyes. She suddenly realized that the ropes had been cut. "Eddie," she whispered. "Eddie, he's letting us go." Eddie raised his spinning head. He didn't know what to think. He made himself sit up and face the ghost. Before Eddie could speak, the thing stepped forward and moved its lips. "Who are you?" it shouted. The harshly spoken words pounded into Eddie's eardrums. Christine jumped back and brushed the ropes off her legs. It was all too much to believe. Eddie clutched Christine's arm as the figure moved closer. As the ragged thing stepped into the light of the candle, Eddie suddenly realized that this was not a ghost at all. It was a real man. "He's real. He's just a person," Eddie said to Christine. "Yes, of course I'm real. I'm Dr. Blackwell," said the figure, overhearing the teenager. "But who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my hospital?" the old man demanded. Christine instantly knew that something was wrong with this man as she stared into his blazing eyes. He was mad. Completely and totally mad. We came here to film a ghost," she said. The old man put the scalpel back in his pocket and cocked his head curiously. Ghost? Why, there's no ghost here. Eddie hushed Christine and carefully worded his response. We're very sorry. We didn't mean to bother you, but we're all in great danger. Christine stammered. Michael Myers is upstairs. He's already killed some of our friends, and he was coming after us, and we felt... Dr. Blackwell silenced her with a wild wave of his arm. He whispered, Damn it, where is he? Eddie pointed a shaky finger toward the ceiling. He's up there. We gave him a shot of Thorazine and tied him up in a straitjacket, but he started moving around before we found the laundry chute. The doctor laughed as if Eddie had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Michael Myers has had so much Thorazine in his lifetime, he's practically immune to its effects. But you say you tied him up in a straitjacket. Christine stammered. Yes, we just barely escaped. Her skin crawled at the creepy dark circles under the doctor's eyes. He tried to kill us. Rubbing his chin as if in deep thought, Dr. Blackwell commented, Interesting. Very interesting. Dr. Blackwell ran his dirty hand along Eddie's back. Eddie shivered as the long, yellowed fingernails touched his shirt. Eddie pleaded, We've got to get out of here. Can you help us? Christine stared wide-eyed at Eddie, the deranged psychiatrist. He was alive and well. Well, not well, but alive. This was too weird. Perhaps, Dr. Blackwell decided. The odds are in our favor if you were able to tie him up. I've never been able to subdue him since I came back. Is there a way out of here? A way back out of here? Eddie asked eagerly. No, Dr. Blackwell hissed. We must plan this out carefully, one step at a time. You don't understand what you're dealing with here. Christine certainly understood that they were all going to die if they just sat there. She had to get this madman to understand. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Eddie sat down on a rusty folding chair, continuing to film as the doctor thumbed through a thick, dusty book. How long have you been back here, Dr. Blackwell? I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but we'd heard that you were dead. That's why we came here to film your ghost. Dr. Blackwell looked up from the book and around the room at the pitiful surroundings. True, I was once head of psychiatry here many years ago. My work was written up in many medical journals. My approaches to cases were, let's say, a little ahead of their time, he bragged. Like shocking people to death and giving lobotomies? Christine blurted out without thinking. What kind of therapy is that? Who told you that? The old man hissed. Who dares to question my practices? Eddie took a deep breath and answered in Christine's defense. I looked at the autopsy reports. There were 3 deaths by electroshock therapy and a few deaths of patients who had lobotomies. You know nothing, the pitiful old man spat out. The kids cringed back as his eyes darted around wildly. You don't know what you're talking about. And turn off that goddamn camera. Eddie quickly turned it off. Christine was really shaken by the doctor's response and knew that they had to get away from this lunatic as soon as possible. The old man suddenly slammed the book shut and stared at them, his eyes empty. His authoritative veneer seemed to fall away in pieces, and he began to weep. I'm old now. I have nothing. Nothing but painful memories. Nothing but regrets and failures. He wiped a tear from his cheek and continued, I must capture Michael Myers. I blame myself for his wrongdoing. I am an accomplice to each and every one of his murders. What do you mean? Eddie asked nervously. The doctor sniveled. I tried everything to get a response. Rage therapy, electroshock, solitary confinement, nothing worked. I experimented on him unbeknownst to his regular doctor. When Michael Myers first came here, he was just a boy of 6. He'd murdered his own sister on Halloween, you know. He didn't speak a word for 15 years. He was planning his escape. His revenge upon society. I feel that I played a key part in that. I should have never interrupted his treatment plan. I should never. He looked at the teenagers with dull eyes. Perhaps if I hadn't done the things I did, maybe things would have turned out differently. Christine did not disagree. She was horrified by the idea of electroshock. She'd seen what it had done to Maggie. how the electricity had snapped her spine and charred her face. She held back a wave of nausea. Eddie nervously rubbed a spot off his glasses. "So how do we get out of here?" he asked impatiently. The doctor pulled himself together. "I've been watching the grounds for months, waiting for the right moment. This horrible place, this basement, is where he's been living like a wild animal all these years." He pointed to a grimy nest made up of old newspapers and tattered sheets in the corner. "This is his den. I've been waiting for him to come down here. That's why I rigged up the trap. I've been planning to capture him and right the wrongs I've created. We've got to be careful. Michael Myers is a monster. A bloodthirsty monster." The old man's voice suddenly went silent, as a metallic screeching noise echoed from upstairs. Christine shrieked, "He's free! Oh God, we've got to get out of here!" Chapter 17. Upstairs on the old couch, Brandon handed Julie the nearly empty wine bottle. She giggled uproariously and greedily polished off the last of the red liquid. "Now what?" she asked, slurring the words. "I'm bored." Her head was spinning, and she'd pretty much forgotten the fact that they were trapped in the gloomy old hospital. "Yeah," Brandon agreed. "This place really sucks. Remind me to never go anywhere with Christine again." Julie smiled dryly. "What a stupid idea this was. How come you talked us into coming here?" Brandon began tickling Julie. "So you're admitting you were wrong for once," Brandon teased. "Come on, admit it." Howling with laughter, Julie managed to hold Brandon's hand back for a moment. Okay, I'm sorry," she screeched. Retreating from his tickle attack, Brandon sat back and flashed a smile at her. "You're beautiful when you're wrong. Did you know that?" "Oh, right. Thanks a lot," she giggled, then twisted a lock of her waist-length hair and glanced around. "So now, what exactly are we going to do? Do you think anyone has noticed that we're missing yet?" "Nah, those dorks are busy chasing ghosts down there," he said sarcastically. Julie glanced around nervously and thought she saw a shadow move in the corner. She did a double take and saw that it was just a tree in the window casting a shadow on the wall. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked suddenly. "I mean, maybe the ghost was the one who slashed our tires and locked the gates." "Absolutely not," Brandon declared. "What happened out there was the work of one of those geeks, and I'm going to find out who it was and kick his wimpy little ass. Mark my words." "But why would they do something like that?" she asked, not quite believing that one of the crew would have sabotaged all of the vehicles. "Who knows?" Brandon said. "Geeks are weird, you know? That's why they're geeks. They're not normal like you and me." Julie felt the wine traveling to her head, making her feel lightheaded. "Normal?" she said and sighed. "What is normal anyway?" Brandon placed his hand on her knee and gave it a knowing squeeze. "This is normal," he said, leaning in to plant a kiss on her lips. He gently stroked her pale face with his hands. "Why don't we finish off what we started before we were so rudely interrupted?" he said. Julie patted the arm of the couch, which brought up a cloud of dust. "Not here," she said and coughed. "Not after what happened earlier. Someone might come up here to rescue us. It's too risky. No privacy." Brandon lazily glanced down the dark hallway. "There's no one up here, Julie. We're locked in, remember? Besides, even if they did come up here, we'd hear them first. It's quiet as a morgue." Julie stood up and stretched her legs. She stumbled backward a little, which made her giggle. "Why don't we just go in there?" she asked and pointed. Brandon squinted through the darkness at the open door she was pointing at. "How'd that get open?" he wondered. "I could have sworn we checked every door and they were all locked or sealed shut." "Maybe the concierge opened it for us. They might even have room service and cable TV," Julie said sarcastically. She rolled her eyes and pulled Brandon to his feet. "We must have just missed it. Who cares?" "Yeah," Brandon laughed nervously. "Who cares?" Julie stepped into the room first. "Look!" she exclaimed. "There's even a little cot in here." Brandon felt his hormones taking over, overriding his nervousness. He put his hands on Julie's shoulders and leaned in to give her a kiss. Julie's warm lips met his, and they embraced passionately. "Looks like this trip might not be so bad after all," she said, staring into his eyes. "It's been a trip, all right. A head trip," he said. Brandon peeled off his shirt, grinning. I'm still never going to speak to your friend Christine again. We could have been at the cabin instead of locked up in this dump. We could have been in front of a roaring fireplace. It's August, Julie reminded him. It's a little too hot for a fire, don't you think? I'm already hot, Brandon joked. He flopped backward onto the cot and tried to make himself comfortable on the lumpy bed. He patted the sheets and motioned for Julie to come over. Suddenly, and without warning, the cot began to move, and the white sheet engulfed Brandon. He began screaming and thrashing around. Get him off me! Help! Julie watched wide-eyed for a second and then began laughing. Come on, Brandon, stop fooling around. You almost scared me. The smile instantly faded from Julie's face when she realized that Brandon really was screaming. Something was wrong. A sharp, piercing fear stabbed through her brain. A pair of arms clad in an untied straitjacket suddenly whipped around Brandon's bare chest, and a hideous masked face appeared at the head of the bed. The evil, vicious eyes the thing bore into her. It was Michael Myers. Before Julie could react, she saw the rusty operating knife that Michael Myers clutched in his hand. Help me! Brandon screeched as he kicked his legs around wildly. Julie shook her head in disbelief and stumbled back against the wall, watching in horrified fascination as the knife sliced into Brandon's abdomen. His eyes were glazed over in shock as he stared at the hideous incision. Oh my God! Julie screamed, nearly collapsing from the awful sight. Brandon was now howling in pain and clutching the gaping wound in horror. His hands became soaked with sticky red blood and he screamed again. Brandon stared into Julie's eyes and gasped, Run! Through his blood-filled mouth. He fell backward on the bed and shuddered involuntarily as the blood puddled to the floor. His fingers curled closed and his eyelids shut. Michael Myers suddenly jumped up from beneath the sheet where he had been hiding, tossing Brandon's body onto the linoleum floor. He raised the knife and began stumbling toward Julie. Julie cried out involuntarily and felt the room and the darkness closing in on her. She forced herself to run out into the dark hallway. She banged on doors and clawed at windows as she made her way toward the end. The sound of her own screaming piercing her eardrums. Brandon was dead, and she was going to die too. Julie knew that she was running toward a dead end, but her feet kept moving anyway to escape the unimaginable horror that was chasing her. The monster just yards away that was trying to steal her life. She reached the end of the hallway and pressed her face against the plate glass window. She could see the broken cars and the rental truck parked on the ground below. Her heart thudded rapidly when she glanced backward and saw Michael stumbling toward her with the bloody instrument clasped in his hand. His white plastic mask was splattered with blood and the straitjacket was stained with deep crimson patches. My God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Julie mumbled, pressing her back against the icy cold window. Every layer of sanity fell to the floor. Her mouth was forced into a silent scream as Michael Myers moved toward her. There was nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. He raised the bloodied knife above his deformed head and took another step. Somebody help me! Julie screamed, knowing that no one could help her now. She pressed her body tightly against the glass. She looked down again. It was her only chance. She forced herself to face the shadowed monster that was approaching. Panic numbed her limbs and mind, choking out all rational thoughts. In a last attempt to save her life, Julie ran back a few steps and hurled her body at the window. She babbled to herself insanely as she made contact with the window. Glass shattered and she let out a horrified scream. The ground 2 stories below closed in at lightning-fast speed. In an instant, her head smacked against something rock-hard, snapping her neck in half. Michael Myers stood before the shattered plate of glass in the pitch-black corridor. A few strands of silky black hair remained caught in the jagged, glittery shards. His black, soulless eyes peered down at the girl below, whose broken body now lay across a crumbling angelic cherub atop the old fountain. Her neck stuck out at a crooked angle, and blood trickled across her pale face from her open mouth, dripping into the dry pool. Chapter 18. In the basement, Eddie protectively put his arm around Christine. They sat across the table from Dr. Blackwell, who was scribbling notes on a piece of paper. The old man crumpled the paper in a ball and threw it across the room in frustration. It won't work, he hissed, burying his head in his hands. What won't work? Christine stammered. The old man raised his head. His frozen eyes revealed a tortured, aching soul. He sighed. The trap that you two fell into. I set it for him, but now it's ruined. We don't have time to repair it. Is there a window down here? Maybe we could break out and make a run for the highway? Eddie suggested hopefully. The basement and first floor windows are secured with iron grills, the doctor told him, his face becoming a stilly mask again. I barricaded off the staircase down here with bricks and cement. The only way out is through the laundry chute. But the door up there in the hallway is locked, Christine said, and he might still be in there waiting for us. The old man fumbled in his pocket and extracted a ring of keys. Ah, but I have the keys to every door in the place, he stated. His expression became dark and he stared at Eddie, holding his gaze. We'll have to take our chances, because if we wait down here, he'll certainly find us before daybreak. The thought of crawling back up the steep laundry chute made Christine tremble with fear. Even if they could make it up, what would be waiting for them up there in that pitch-black hallway? The old man shook his head suddenly, as if he were remembering something. He turned to Eddie. You said you came here to film Ghost. What did you use as a power source? Eddie didn't understand where the conversation was going, but he answered. The generator we brought, but... Dr. Blackwell rose from the table, his tall form resembling a shadowy old oak tree. You must take me to it. I have a plan that may work if we have a power source. Let's go! Eddie protested. But what if he's up there and he... The old man cut him off. If we hide here, we will all certainly die. That I am sure of. He turned and removed a shotgun from a rack inside the cabinet behind him. He whirled around. Now move, he ordered, poking the barrel of the gun at the startled teenagers. Eddie tensed up and Christine jumped to her feet in surprise as the blood rushed to her head. Was he going to shoot them if they didn't go along with the plan? She didn't want to find out, so she reluctantly followed Eddie up the steep, narrow chute. Upstairs, the barrel of the shotgun poked up out of the chute after Eddie and Christine. For a moment, she considered grabbing it from the crazy old man, but then she remembered that she had no idea how to use it. Besides, he would lead them to safety, she hoped. Dr. Blackwell wheezed and struggled to pull his ancient body through the chute. Help me, you morons, he hissed through clenched teeth. Eddie gave him a hand and pulled the decrepit old man out. Eddie and Christine cowered behind the doctor, who poked the muzzle into the open room. He's gone, the old man whispered. Christine trembled and stared off into the darkness. Where did he go? She asked fearfully. He could be anywhere, Dr. Blackwell said. He knows his way around this hospital better than anyone. We've got to be very careful. The thought of Michael Myers hiding somewhere in the building made Eddie's stomach tighten up into a ball of nerves. The generator is down in the lobby, he whispered hoarsely. After Dr. Blackwell opened the locked door in the hallway, the group made their way quickly down the stairs toward the lobby, knowing that the nightmarish monster could be waiting them, or hiding in some dark corner waiting to strike. A warm breeze wafted through the splintered, shattered front doors in the lobby, carrying the acrid smell of burning fuel and death from the blazing fire up on the highway. Christine stepped around the debris and noticed that one of the doors had been ripped off its hinges. She pointed to the highway. It's still burning. Help should be there any minute. Let's go up to the highway and wait. No, Dr. Blackwell said. His nostrils flared. There is no time. He'll find us out there. He pointed the gun at Eddie while unlocking a door adjacent to the front doors of the lobby. Bring the generator in here, he ordered. Eddie did as he was told, pushing the generator into a dusty room that he guessed must have been the main office. A few desks with old-fashioned typewriters and telephones on them still sat undisturbed. Christine gawked as mildew and must filled the thick air in the room and spots on the ceiling sagged inward from water damage. The old man frantically ordered Eddie to place the generator next to a counter with an old microphone embedded on top. He ducked behind the wooden counter and began furiously dismantling wires. This is the intercom system, he explained. We'll fire it up and I'll coax him down here. Oh no, please, Christine pleaded. Let's get out while we can. I said no, the old man warned. We wouldn't have a chance. He grabbed the power cord on the generator and began attaching the wires to it. He continued, Michael Myers always wanted things to be normal again and to be able to go home and stay there. So we're going to make him think that that can happen. I need you two to help me or it won't work. This is insane, Eddie hissed. It'll never work. He's a madman. He's murdered our friends. That's 7 people. You can't reason with insanity. You can't... Suddenly, footsteps became audible, traveling along the floor above. The old man glanced up and smiled toothlessly. Well, it's a little too late for Plan B now, isn't it? He said calmly. That's our boy up there, as you know. I'd recognize that shuffle anywhere. He cranked the handle on the generator and the old piece of machinery rattled to life. No, we don't know that everybody's dead. Maybe it's Julie and Brandon or Stanley and Randy, Christine pointed out weakly. Maybe they're okay, she said, breaking into sobs, knowing damn well that they weren't okay. Dr. Blackwell didn't have to say anything more. Anyone else being alive was nearly out of the question, given the circumstances. Eddie recalled finding Stanley's radio and seeing the bloody mess on the floor. He did not have to see the bodies. He knew that something terrible had happened. A feeling of dread grabbed hold of him, and he knew that whatever the old man was planning was their only hope for escaping this nightmare with their lives. Without warning, the old intercom system buzzed throughout the building. Christine screamed and covered her ears. Turn it off, she screeched, the horrible noise. Dr. Blackwell raised his shotgun. You two over there in front of the door, he ordered. What? Eddie yelled. We're not going out there. Are you crazy? The old man flipped off the safety latch on the gun. His maddened eyes burned into the teenage couple. I said get in front of the door. Just stand there and don't move until I signal. Now! He rasped. Christine felt as if she were in a nightmare that she couldn't wake from as she and Eddie stepped into the lobby at gunpoint. Eddie wrapped his arms around her and she shook with uncontrollable sobs. He glanced out the broken door at the fire still burning up on the highway. The emergency vehicles had not arrived on the scene yet. He wondered how much longer it would take for someone to make the call. Please, God, somebody come, he silently prayed. Video camera still in hand, Eddie turned it on without the doctor noticing. With the shotgun in one hand and the microphone in the other, the insane old man began speaking in a smooth, gentle voice over the intercom. Michael Myers, this is Dr. Blackwell, the hospital administrator. Please report to the main lobby. Your mommy and daddy are here to take you home. Rage and fury swept over Eddie. You're using us, you bastard! You're setting us up! He screamed at the old man. As he began to lunge toward the doctor, a shadowed shape suddenly appeared at the bottom of the stairs. It was Michael Myers. Eddie and Christine stood frozen in front of the door as the dead, lifeless eyes danced over them curiously from behind the mask. Christine felt as if her body were on fire with panic, and she struggled to keep her mouth closed. Dr. Blackwell coaxed over the intercom. You see, Michael, there they are. Your mommy is crying because she's so happy to see you. You can go home now, Michael, because you've been a good boy. It's okay. Go on. Michael Myers lurched forward, one heavy step at a time. His dented head was cocked to the side as he moved toward the silhouettes that stood before him. The only living thing about his mangled body was his glinting, evil eyes and rattled breathing. Christine felt as if millions of insects were crawling across her flesh, as her eyes widened in horror. She could no longer hold back her screams. Her mouth opened and her eyes closed involuntarily, as the sound of her own high-pitched voice filled the room. She had to escape from this madness, now or never. Michael Myers stopped dead in his tracks, and the curious gaze instantly turned to hatred and deceit. Christine clawed at the front door of the building as Michael Myers moved closer. Except now his outstretched arms reached for her throat. In a split second, Eddie saw Dr. Blackwell raise the gun from the next room. Eddie threw his body on top of Christine as they crashed to the floor, as the bullet exploded from the rifle, hitting Michael Myers in the head. A pitiful wail escaped from Michael Myers' mouth and he stumbled backward. A trickle of blood drizzled down his white mask. Christine screamed and backed into the far corner of the room. Eddie looked around desperately for another way out. "My God!" Eddie cried out, his heart pounding. Michael Myers began moving toward the old man, who cursed as he fired the gun again and again. Even the piercing bullets that sank into Michael Myers' chest didn't stop him. Eddie watched transfixed as Michael Myers stumbled toward the old man. "Stop him!" Dr. Blackwell screamed. "Somebody help me!" Christine covered her eyes, whimpering, and Eddie stared as Michael Myers plucked the skinny old doctor from behind the counter and began strangling him with the cord of the microphone. The doctor struggled and kicked as Michael Myers gripped his neck from behind. Dr. Blackwell's foot slammed into the generator. The old machine tumbled to the floor and whined. The acrid stench of Michael Myers filled Christine's nostrils and she screamed again. Eddie grabbed Christine by the hand and scooped the camera up as the generator sputtered to a stop. Chapter 19. Eddie and Christine traveled back into the bowels of the building. Out of the corner of her eye, Christine saw Michael. His filthy hands dropped the limp body of the old man to the floor like a wet rag. His evil eyes fixed upon the fleeing couple, and he stumbled through the darkness after them. Down the dark corridor, Eddie dragged Christine through the first door he saw. The sign outside read, "Group Therapy Room." "No," Christine whimpered. "We've got to get out. He's going to kill us." Eddie slammed the door behind them and tried to catch his breath. All he could see were the black walls and the image of Michael Myers. Suddenly, Christine gasped and fell to the floor screaming, a terrified noise. She was babbling and pointing hysterically while tugging at Eddie's pant leg. His eyes adjusted to the darkness. Eddie whispered over the pulsing beat of his own heart and could not hear his own voice. "Oh God, no!" Black blood glistened across the linoleum floor and several motionless figures were seated in a circle of chairs around the room. The bloodied faces of the missing film crew stared back at Eddie through dull glazed dead eyes. The choking reek of death filled the air and Eddie screamed, "Dead! They're all dead! Oh my God!" Christine could smell the fresh blood. She could almost taste it. She tried to look away from the bruised, butchered carcasses, but could not. She stared at the bodies of her friends. The shocked and mortified expressions upon their blood-drained faces told the story of what had happened. What horrors that they had seen. Eddie backed away a few paces in a daze, and his foot bumped into something that rolled. He looked down and saw Jason's severed head staring up at him. "Ah!" he screamed, stepping away from the sickening mess. Another wave of panic washed over him as his eyes searched the room. Christine clutched at Eddie's trembling hand with shock, and her eyes widened as another series of pitched screams rattled out of her raw throat. Eddie could barely think. He shook as his eyes darted around the dark room. "This can't be happening. It can't be happening," he whispered hoarsely. "We've got to get out!" Christine managed to squeak. "Please, Eddie, we have to get away before he..." And then Eddie's heartbeat quickened. Heavy footsteps clunked behind the closed door. His flesh began to crawl, and he knew that they were not alone. He knew who it was and what was going to happen next. The sound of a faint noise drifted underneath the doorway. Eddie pointed at the tiny window in the corner of the room. "It's our only chance!" The door handle rattled violently. Christine looked at the doorway and the window and then back to the doorway. "But the window has an iron grill over it. We can't get out. We're trapped in here." A dull black shadow became visible underneath the doorway. She fought off the urge to scream again and forced herself to concentrate on getting out. "But we've got to try." Eddie hoisted himself up to the window and pulled it open. Using all his strength, he pushed against the filthy, rusted grill. It wouldn't budge. "Push harder," Christine whispered, looking back at the door, which seemed to be buckling inward from the force on the other side. Eddie's eyes searched Christine's face, her beautiful face. He had to save them somehow from this unimaginable nightmare. At that moment, the door crashed open and the hulking shape of Michael Myers was framed in the splintered doorway, illuminated by the gleaming moonlight that crept in through the barred window. Black blood soaked his bullet-riddled clothing. Eddie pushed Christine into the corner, where she watched in horror as Michael Myers crashed across the room, through the circle of dead bodies, knocking them off of their chairs. Eddie lifted a metal chair and swung it at Michael Myers, who moved like a vaporous cloud of black mist. The crushing blow knocked the hideous monster back a few feet, but he regained his balance and hissed, drawing back his bluish lips, revealing a set of rotted teeth through the mask. Christine crawled on her knees, searching desperately for something to use as a weapon. She could barely breathe through the suffocating panic that seemed to pollute every particle of her body. Christine grabbed something and realized that it was Julie's pulseless wrist. Her neck was blackened from the break. Christine let out another scream. Eddie swung the chair again at Michael, which made him stumble backward slightly again. In that moment of weakness, Eddie swung again and again in fear and anger, beating against the sunken chest and weakened bones until the body finally lay still. He kicked the legs of Michael Myers through the doorway into the hallway. The smell of death was choking. Eddie stood on the chair again and pressed his face against the grill on the window and greedily sucked in the fresh air from outside. He pushed again and felt the ancient grill move a little. He pushed again, harder and harder. Christine stood on the chair with him and helped. Eddie could see the cement breaking loose on the outside. "Push!" Christine screamed, her voice cracking. "Come on, push!" The bottom corners of the grill broke free with another shove. Christine looked over her shoulder and saw that Michael Myers' body was missing. "Eddie!" she screamed. "He's gone! He's gonna—" Suddenly, Eddie and Christine crashed to the floor as the chair was knocked out from under their feet. Eddie landed flat on his back and the breath had been knocked out of his lungs. Without warning, Michael Myers' hand slammed Eddie's head against the ground. The decayed teeth behind the mask were bared, and Michael Myers' hand clasped in a death grip around Eddie's neck, choking the life out of him. A loud blast boomed through the room, and Michael Myers loosened his grip. The weight of his body fell forward in a heap on top of Eddie. Dr. Blackwell stood hunched in the doorway, holding a smoking shotgun, with his bloodied, withered fingers. His face was bluish, and a deep bleeding wound stretched across his neck. His hair and coat were soaked with his own blood. He croaked, "Get out! Get out of here!" Christine pulled Eddie's body out from under the massive hulk of Michael Myers' blood-soaked form. "Come on!" she shouted to the old man. Dr. Blackwell closed his eyes in defeat and collapsed backward into the shadows of the corridor. Christine looked away as his body writhed and withered. It was too late to save him. Eddie stared down at the massive lump on the floor and took Christine's trembling hand in his. "This is it. Let's get out of here," he shouted. Eddie and Christine hoisted themselves out the window and squeezed through the cracked grate. Christine fell on her back on the ground below, coughing and gasping. Eddie stumbled to her side and wrapped his arms around her. "We're safe now," he told her, stroking her hair gently. Christine's eyes searching his face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why?" "I don't know," Eddie answered blankly. "We'll never know." He pulled her to her feet and toward the fire up on the highway. The glass on the window above suddenly shattered, and a dark, bloody hand emerged from out of the remnants of the window. The hand of Michael Myers grabbed the sill and began to heave the weight of his body through the opening. Christine gasped when she noticed the shadowed figure scaling down the black wall of the old building. "Run, Eddie! He's coming after us!" she screeched. From miles away, the faint whining of sirens could be heard. Eddie stood there, transfixed for a moment. "Come on," he shouted. "The police are on their way." Eddie dragged Christine by the hand along the tall fences of iron, searching for a way out. He squeezed her hand tightly. He wasn't going to let her slip away. Not now, not ever. In a blind dash, they ran across the grounds, not looking back at the building looming behind them. Eddie finally stopped running when they reached the front gates of the hospital, where he found them locked by a thick chain. There was no way out. Eddie banged his head against the solid gates in frustration. Christine suddenly began whimpering. Not more than 20 yards behind them came crashing noise through the weeded landscape. Eddie twisted around and saw Michael stumbling in their direction. "Oh no! No!" he screamed. With no time to think, Eddie pulled Christine across the gravel and motioned for her to crawl into the back of the rental truck. Eddie placed a hand over Christine's mouth in an attempt to silence her frightened cries. Something gleaming caught Eddie's eyes, and he picked up a crowbar from beneath the sagging truck. A dark shadow slowly approached the couple as beads of sweat dripped down Eddie's forehead. He gripped the crowbar tightly and hoisted his body up on the roof of the truck. The footsteps came closer, just a few feet away now. The sound of rattled breathing filled the air. Eddie poised himself ready to strike. Michael Myers lurched toward the back of the truck. Eddie shrieked and flung his body off the truck onto Michael Myers. Michael's huge body crumpled to the ground from the sudden attack from above. Eddie heard himself screaming as he stood above the hideous monster and pummeled its head over and over again with the heavy metal bar. Blood spattered onto Christine's face as she jumped out of the back of the truck and screamed, pulling Eddie away from the still bloodied body. "Let's go!" she yelled. Eddie allowed himself to be led away from Michael Myers. He transfixed his gaze and suddenly focused it on Christine's face. "He's dead," he croaked. "I wouldn't bet on it," she whispered. "We've got to get out now," she warned, handing Eddie a massive pair of wire cutters that she had found in the bed of the truck. Eddie clipped at a link of the heavy chain with the dull cutters until it finally snapped in half. Christine hastily unhooked the link and unwrapped the chain. They ran through the wooded field, away from the deteriorating old insane asylum. When they crossed the ditch and stepped onto the highway, the emergency crews had just arrived. A paramedic whisked them away to check them out for injuries. The terrified couple sat in the back of the ambulance, still holding hands as they explained to a startled police officer what had happened inside the old abandoned asylum. Epilogue. The police officer finally finished his questioning and sent a team down to investigate the murders after the fire had been put out on the highway. The first rays of morning sun crept over the mountainside as Christine and Eddie were whisked away in a squad car to answer more questions down at the station. Eddie placed his hand on Christine's knee and looked into her eyes. "It's over. Thank God it's over. We're alive." Christine shook her head sadly and began sobbing for all of their friends who hadn't been so lucky. I know, Eddie whispered. "We'll dedicate the documentary to our friends." Christine stared at him through red, tear-swollen eyes. "But they all died for nothing. Absolutely nothing." Eddie patted his vest. "I've got the video camera right here. We've got enough tape here to put together a really nice memorial piece." "They'd have liked that, Eddie," she whispered. "They'd have liked that a lot." The police teams entered the old building. From high up on the hillside, a pair of eyes watched the flurry of activity around the hospital below. The shape, clad in black, let out a tortured wail and stumbled through the trees, away from the noise and the voices, away from the only home he ever knew. Okay, this has been chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19. The conclusion of Halloween the Madhouse. I gotta say, out of 1 out of 10, I give this book a 7, maybe an 8. I really enjoyed the story, really enjoyed the kills, and I gotta say, for a young adult novel, it was a pretty damn good Halloween novel. You know, aside from Michael screaming into the woods at the very end in the epilogue, but other than that, I really enjoyed it. Everybody let me know in the comment section what you thought of the book as a whole, and if you're looking forward to the last of these books, the Halloween, the Old Myers Place. I'll be doing it pretty soon, but the next book up in the 80 Slasher Library is going to be Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs. Stay tuned. Any day now, I'll be beginning Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs. Till next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80 Slasher Librarian saying, thanks for listening, and it's over. Thank God. It's really over.